What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of The Lawyer You Know. And today we are continuing to react to the verdict in Brendan Banfield's case, the au pair affair. We also have a couple new interviews to kind of recap and react to with my dad. We are also going to get Whitney's take on the verdict and what she thought of it, what she thought of the press conference afterwards with the prosecutors, and what she thinks should happen in Juliana's sentencing. We get all that from her as well. So without further ado, everybody hit that like button. Let's get to it. All right. So we are back here, Dad, and we are going to talk through a couple of different topics here with what happened in the Brendan Banfield case over in Virginia. There was a guilty verdict on all four counts, a clean sweep for the prosecution team. And it was about a day and a half of deliberation, which from all research, that I don't really buy into very much. But, when it talks about 1 hour per day or 1 day per week or whatever of trial, but it was about a day and a half. So not a very long time. And they come back with all guilty verdicts. What were your thoughts when you heard he was guilty?
Well, I was not surprised. I think that in the recast, we both said that it was going to be a guilty verdict, because that would be our prediction. And really, and we both based it on the fact by what a mistake it was for him to testify. That before he testified, we thought, well, maybe he had a chance. And then I think that his chance went downhill after he testified.
Yeah, I mean, I think Juliana's testimony was good enough and credible enough. And I think his own testimony, when compared with hers, was pretty much like the final nail in the coffin. I wasn't surprised at all with the verdict. Were you surprised at all about the timing? Like did you think it was quicker, slower, about what you thought?
Well, they deliberated for 9.5 hours. That was the actual deliberation time. That wasn't too bad. That was... It was obvious they considered things, they talked about things. It wouldn't have been right to come back right away. Let's face it, look how serious this is. We're talking about first degree M's here. So they did deliberate, they did talk about it, they did go over the evidence. So, 9.5 hours, not a bad amount of time.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I think there was 9 or 10 days of trial. So it's pretty much right in line with what the research shows is average. So, I always like to talk about the timing, because I do think sometimes if it's a 5-minute verdict, that can be an appellate issue. I mean, usually it's not a great argument, but it is something that at least you can think about if you have a runaway juror or somebody that lied to get on the jury and was going to go back and make sure they force some kind of verdict. A 5-minute verdict can sometimes help with that argument, but I don't know. We'll kind of see. Did you think that a lot of people were asking, and now is your guys' chance to ask questions to my dad? I don't think we've had him on live at all. The number one question everybody says is, are you in jail? Which is always the number one question that we have.
It's not. I was I keep forgetting because my Zoom is kind of fuzzy, but not the streams. Oh, that's all right.
So yes, he's sitting in his office at our house, or at his house.
It's my man cave.
Yeah, it's like the worst office and man cave you ever see in your life. When we were kids, we never wanted to go in there. There was like roaches in there. It was disgusting. It's a little bit nicer now, but it has like a certain smell to it. I can like still smell it as I sit here in my office. That's where he's sitting right now in his, we'll call it his home office, or if you want to call it your man cave, that's fine. But my mom let him smoke cigars out there and stuff. So that's why it was always gross to us, but that's his personal space. Mine's much nicer at my house. So, but yeah, that's where he's at. Not jail, but kind of felt like jail for us. We didn't want to go in there. So anyways, back to the verdict. The number one question I was getting when we were talking about the verdict is, everybody thought his lawyer did a really bad job as, viewers and as lay people, and dropped the ball and all this stuff. And they were asking, how good do you think his chances are at an ineffective assistance of counsel claim in the post-conviction phase?
Almost no chance. Ineffective assistance of counsel, the standard is just so high to prove that. If a lawyer asks questions, if he cross-examines the witness, if he is obviously, knows something about the case and he doesn't sleep through the trial, it's very hard to prove that someone was ineffective, because there's just a minimum standard, and he did the minimum standard. So I don't think there's any chance of an ineffective assistance.
And you remember we had that case. I think the lawyer objected like 2 times in a month-long trial or something, and we were working on the appeal, and even that wasn't considered to be ineffective assistance of counsel. I mean, can you imagine objecting 2 times in a month-long trial?
Well, we had one where they hired us on same thing. It's a habeas 3.50, but they hired us, and the lawyer in the case did not do a single deposition, did not question a single witness before the trial, and just walked into the trial cold. And that's the way he tried the case. And the court said, he did a fine job of cross-examining those witnesses, and it's not ineffective assistance.
Yeah, and lawyers, a lot of defense lawyers like to say stuff like, I can sit over there and play tic-tac-toe, or I can fall asleep at the table, and if the defense still doesn't prove their case, it has to be not guilty, which is true. Hopefully nobody expects that or thinks a lawyer's actually going to do that, and most lawyers don't. We've covered cases in the past on YouTube, even I think I have one of the lawyers on that barely crossed any witnesses, didn't do a tough case, and ended up losing.
You're breaking up pretty bad.
I am? Okay. John, let me know if it is so I can try to do something on my end or if it's on your side. So anyway, so we've covered cases like that, but we always hope that they don't. Sometimes it does. Dan Tuffle said bail fund for Opportunity to get out of the prison. So, yeah, people are saying it sounds weird. Internet? Okay. Why don't you just talk about
You're doing good. You're good now.
Okay. Question for you. Do you think Brendan would have been not guilty if the defense didn't put on a case?
I think he would have had a better shot. I don't know if the verdict would have been any different, but I think he would have had a better chance if he didn't put on a case. Some of his case was worth putting on. I don't want to say that, no case. I don't think he should have testified, but there were a couple things. I think it was Miller was the guy's name that testified to, what his conclusions were from taking a look at the computer. If you would have left it at that, I might have put that guy on, but he just went too far, put on too many witnesses, and he basically got ramrodded after he put on those couple witnesses that they sunk him.
Have you ever encountered ineffective assistance of counsel appeal that worked? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have definitely seen them. It just, most of the time, I'll let you answer. You have more experience with it. Most of the time, it's like they screw up or don't do something big, like something huge, rather than they sit there and they're like, let them prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes that laziness doesn't always work.
Well, the ineffective assistance, the only time I've really seen it work isn't ineffective assistance during the trial and what they did at the trial, but giving the client bad advice or telling the client the wrong law or not advising the client. In other words, telling the client, look, this case has a maximum of 5 years in prison when in fact it has a maximum of 15 years in prison. That kind of advice outside of the courtroom, those are the things that usually cause a reversal for ineffective assistance. Normally, if they go in and they show up and they ask questions, the court will not give an ineffective assistance.
Yeah, it's not doing something big or screwing up something simple that like every lawyer should know how to do. Those seem like the big ones more than you didn't cross-examine this witness enough. Ashley asked, what percentage chance of an appeal on the prosecutorial burden shifting, et cetera? So I don't know. Did we talk about, we did talk about closings where the burden shifting and during cross-examination when they talked about his, not giving, this is the first time you're telling your story. You didn't tell police this then, whatever. And of course, when the defendant testifies, there are some differences, but in my opinion, you never do stuff like that, like they did in cross or in closing. Do you think that's a decent appellate chance for the defendant?
I think it's a good issue. Whether they've got a chance for reversal, I'm not really sure, because it really has to be really, really bad for that to happen. So I think it's a good appellate issue. They have a chance of reversal, but I wouldn't give it I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never bet on it. You'd lose a lot of money if you were betting on appeals cases to get overturned. High Anxiety said, wasn't he a private attorney that Banfield or is family hired? I believe he was a private attorney that they hired. I think he's a former prosecutor, which a lot of criminal defense attorneys are. I thought that meant he'd be more prepared. And I mean, no shade at public defenders at all, by the way. Yeah, I mean, public defenders are private attorneys. There's good ones, there's bad ones. Just because you're a public defender doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're good. Just because you're a private attorney doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're good. And this guy put in a lot of work. I mean, he prepared this case big time. He had a lot to do. Most defense attorneys do not put on this amount of witnesses. And the vast majority of these witnesses were hostile towards the defense. They were not trying to help him out. They were not trying to be nice. They were not trying to give him softball answers. So it was not an easy case to try by any means, and he was trying it by himself. So it's not to say that this guy just like sucked. He's the worst lawyer we've ever seen. He was very boring, but technically I do think he made some points. He made some good decisions in the people that he called. At the end of the day, if the client's going to push and say he wants to testify, build the whole case around my testimony, the lawyer can try to trump that as a strategic decision. But at the end of the day, it's the client's decision. And I think that was the worst part of the defense.
Well, that also raises an additional point. The burden is even tougher on private lawyers because the appellate courts say, if you choose this lawyer, now if it's a public defender, you're forced to take the public defender, and the burden is not quite on ineffective assistance. They look at that a little closer. But if you, as a private citizen, this is the lawyer you picked, the fact that you're going to complain about a lawyer you picked makes the burden even tougher to get a reversal on ineffective assistance. And that's the law.
Mm-hmm. Sugar Ree said, public defenders try cases so often, a lot of times they're better than private lawyers. We can talk about, because in the civil world, there's a lot more board certified civil defense attorneys because they try more cases representing insurance companies and things like that. But a lot of them sit there and do nothing in a trial, and it counts as them doing a trial. And so you can get board certified like that. So the type of trials and the work you actually do on the trials is more important, in my opinion, than the number of trials you have on your list. So again, my response to this would be, I absolutely agree with you. There are some public defenders that are way better than private attorneys, especially trying cases, but there are still some that are bad that have tried a lot of cases. Because again, I know a couple lawyers that have tried hundreds of cases that just do nothing on almost every case. And that's their strategy as a defense attorney. And they win some and they lose a lot. But again, they've tried a bunch of cases. That doesn't mean they're skilled advocates necessarily. So I definitely think trial experience is important, especially early on, to cut your teeth on some misdemeanors or less serious cases. But not a lot of people try a case like this Brendan Banfield case. So it's not like I think some public defender that have tried a bunch of, murder cases or DUIs or whatever was going to be way better at it than Mr. Carroll was in this case. Charlie Adelson's hearing today was bonkers. Yeah, his oral argument was today. I assume Ufferman did it, but I'm going to check it out. Ufferman represents this guy.
Oh, he does?
Yeah. Oh. Okay, so now let's talk about the press conference afterwards with the prosecutors. I guess the elected DA was the bald guy. I don't know his name.
Yes.
I don't know who he was, but the way he was talking, I assume that's who it was. What did you think of his comments?
They were the appropriate comments that DAs make, and I got to talk about his comments in two ways. One is the beginning comments, normal, appropriate comments. He spoke about the families. I'm glad he did that because that just didn't come out in the trial very much. So I'm glad he spoke about the families and the tragedy of the families, the tragedy of the child, all of that. That was important. What he did do, what I thought was interesting, when the actual trial prosecutor came, I forget her name, with the one with the darker hair, when she was up there and they asked her the question about the sweetheart deal, he pushed her. Not, he didn't literally push her aside, but he pushed her aside because he wanted to make sure, because he knew that was the political hot potato, that question. So he kind of pushed her aside. He stood there to answer the question about a sweetheart deal. And the quote that I thought was important, he goes, how important was her testimony to some of the jurors? Because even during the press conference, they still talked about the blood. And they still talked about the fact, they tried to minimize the co-defendant here, Juliana. They tried to minimize her testimony, which I don't understand that theory at all. I don't understand why. And they must have done this. This must have been a coordinated deal between the prosecutors, because I don't know many prosecutors that would have minimized that, especially after giving the deal they gave. They should make her more important because they gave that deal. So he said he didn't think it was a sweetheart deal. who in the world would not think this was a sweetheart deal? And by the way, I listened to quite a few Virginia defense lawyers that were experts, the so-called experts on these TV news shows. And they say that in Virginia, it will be rare if the judge doesn't do the prosecutor's recommendation. And that's the way it is here too. I mean, it's not unusual for Virginia. Normally they take the prosecutor's recommendations because the prosecutors know more about the case than anybody. So that's what they're saying, is that they'll probably take the prosecutor's recommendations. If I was a judge, this would be the exception. But that's what the experts, the so-called experts in Virginia are saying.
So they think that the judge is just going to give her time served?
They think that would happen in a vast majority of the cases. But none of them said this, and I'm saying it. I think this case is an exception. I think this, after the judge heard the testimony in this case, I think it's an exception. And if I was a judge, no way in the world would I give her time served.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, it just makes no sense. It really just makes no sense. Anything else on the presser? One other thing is they did talk about her being, I guess, manipulated, or they made her sound like the lesser of the two defendants in this case. Again, they did that to justify the deal that they made. So let's see, nothing really else other than that, other than what we just said. Yeah, and Gray Space makes a great point. The prosecutor kept saying the judge can give her up to 10 years and didn't mention their recommendation. It's like, you guys did this, so you got to live with it, period. Like, and make it seem like it was the right decision, because we got both of them. They're both convicted killers now, right? She of manslaughter and him, of double M. And so you did the quote unquote right thing with the sweetheart deal. Maybe it was the best you could have done to get her testimony, but you needed her testimony because she was so important. That's the much better way to explain this. It's a very straight, their whole, and I think it has a lot to do with prior prosecutors that were in the office, prior decision makers, law enforcement disagreements. There's not a lot of cohesion throughout the process of this case, in my opinion, with law enforcement and the DA's office.
One of the things that is, significant, and there was a very short interview of the prosecutors on one of the TV stations, other than this interview, other than their normal press conference. And they admitted in that one, in the short one, I forget her name, but the one with the darker hair, they admitted in that one that they gave her the deal because they arrested her. Remember, the arrest was like a year before. They arrested her in order to get her to make a deal.
Exactly.
The prosecutor admitted that's the reason they arrested her, is to make the deal. And I thought that was significant that they would admit that.
I haven't seen that, but I have heard that. Yeah. That's kind of, and we said that from the jump. Like, you arrest her to put pressure on her to get her to flip. And again, they think she also committed a crime, and they had enough for probable cause to arrest her. So there's nothing like illegal about that, but that's the MO of prosecutors sometimes in these kinds of cases, especially when you have a defendant that did a decent job setting this up. Let's be honest. It was not an easy and simple thing to catch Brendan Banfield here. And we can all act like it's easy now with a pretty quick guilty verdict, but they had to do a lot of work on this case. And I think they had to make the deal because they had to have Juliana's testimony. Laura said, if a lawyer is found guilty of ineffective assistance of counsel, do they go on a Brady list or something? So it's not found guilty of ineffective assistance of counsel. There's a lot of different reasons for it. You don't go on a Brady list. You don't get disbarred for the most part. If you can do certain things where a lot of times I'll say, if you do something that you're going to get disbarred for, usually you get disbarred before the ineffective assistance of counsel claim is even done. If it's reported and people know about it, but no, you're not like thrown in jail or put on a list just because somebody is successful. Do you want to talk about that more, about how lawyers feel, especially criminal defense lawyers feel, when somebody files a 385 or an ineffective assistance of counsel claim against you?
Well, I think a decent lawyer says, go ahead, client, take your shot, because obviously it was a conviction. So you didn't get the guy off. He could be sitting in prison for 15 years or 20 years or life. So what other chance does he have other than filing the ineffective assistance claim. So it's a matter of course on convictions that have long sentences. It happens all the time. And if you're a lawyer that does big cases, you're going to get these kind of attacks. So you kind of just roll with them. The odds are good that you're going to be exonerated because, again, the bar is so high for ineffective assistance of counsel. I think you're a good lawyer, you roll with them. It's the lawyers that don't do a good job that are scared of these.
Yeah, but reputationally, if it's like your first case or only criminal case and it happens, I get why you feel a certain way. But most experienced criminal defense attorneys know this is part of it. And most criminal defense attorneys know people are going to hate them, know people are going to say stuff about them. The public thinks they're the biggest scumbags in the world, and they care about the Constitution. So that's why they do that. That's why they take all the hate publicly. And that's also why they believe if the appellate court thinks I screwed up or did something wrong and I'm the reason my client lost his case, I want it to be overturned. Like most good, confident criminal defense attorneys will say that. Like, yeah, if I screwed up and I'm the reason this guy's in prison for the rest of his life and I dropped the ball legally and I dropped below that very low standard, then absolutely overturn this case. I don't care that I'm the one that tried it, right? That's what a good lawyer who cares about justice would say.
And there's one other thing I do want to mention about the press conference. I was looking at my notes and remembered. The trial lawyer for the prosecutor, here's what she said. She was a defense lawyer for years. And I would have counseled my client not to testify in the case. But the defendant in this case, defense lawyer in this case, didn't have a lot to work with. So I guess that's why he did it. I thought that was interesting that she said she would not have put him on the stand.
I think most people would agree with that. Rhonda, if we said high, we meant low. The bar is low on ineffective assistance of counsel, meaning you don't have to do much to be considered effective under the law. That's what we mean by that. So if we said high bar, low bar, that's what we mean. Okay, so everything we've talked about so far, I also talked about with Whitney. She's not able to join us live. I tried. I even said it at this time because I was hoping this would be the time she'd be able to come. And then, of course, this was like the 1 hour she couldn't do. So I recorded a snippet with her. We're going to play it. I'll get your reaction, Dad. And then, Dad, we'll talk about the 2 interviews we have not talked about yet, Joe Ryan's mom and the police chief interviews that you watched that I haven't seen that we'll discuss, but I didn't discuss them with Whitney either. So now feels like a time to bring up her clip and take a listen to what she had to say about this verdict. All right, so we are going to have to record Whitney's take because she wasn't able to join us live. But when you heard Brendan Banfield was guilty across the board on all 4 counts, what were your thoughts?
I think justice was served. I think that the jury did the right thing. I felt relief. I felt like, good, this guy is not getting away with what he thought he was going to get away with.
So when it comes down to why they convicted him, first off, let's talk about the timing. So they deliberated for about a day and a half, which research shows juries deliberate either if it's a shorter trial, 1 hour per day of trial, or if it's a longer trial, 1 day per week of trial. It's not an exact science, and I've heard people that completely disagree with that. But along those lines, it was right in line basically with what juror research would assume the amount of time they took to come to a guilty verdict. Are you surprised it wasn't quicker? Did you think it was going to be longer? What are your thoughts on the amount of time it took for the jury to reach their verdict?
I will say that for me personally, I felt like it was an easy, yes, he's guilty. So I think the longer it went, where it wasn't immediate, I started to kind of think, could it be a hung jury? Like, are there that many people that could possibly, not think that Juliana's testimony, I guess, was the most credible? I feel like that's where it really was all at, whether or not you believed that her, record of events was true. But at the end, after the verdict came out, it was just relief. I was glad. I thought they did what they needed to do. They took their time. They obviously thought about it, and it was a relief.
So you mentioned Juliana's testimony. There was a press conference after that I'll talk with my dad about too, where the prosecutors again said, Juliana's testimony, not the most important thing. It was of course important, but we could have won the case without it, with the blood evidence, with the digital forensic evidence. And they were, uber confident in that. And they had enough to arrest Brendan Banfield without that, which we heard in the trial because of how the defense brought out the case, which usually we don't hear things like that. What were your thoughts when you heard them say that? Do you agree? Do you think they could have won without Juliana's testimony? Do you think there was enough there?
I don't think so. I think that's what did it for me personally. I think it was her testimony. And I noticed a couple of times, it's like he caught himself. I heard him say, we used Juliana, and then he kind of backtracked. Like he knows that was the real hit, but he doesn't want to maybe admit that. And then I kind of was grossed out by his comments of saying that Juliana added flavor. That was not the move. I think he could have refrained from using that type of lingo.
Yeah, that was weird. And then what about the fact that he said it was not a sweetheart deal? So with how you feel about Brendan, so let's ask this question. It's going to be kind of all one question, but obviously you didn't like Brendan. You weren't a fan of Brendan. I also think one of the really important things is if Juliana didn't testify, I think Brendan would not have testified. And I think the whole case becomes a lot more difficult because I think there were some people. Do you agree with that, Dad, that if Juliana doesn't testify, if she never flips, do you think Brendan testifies, or do you think they just let it sit as you guys couldn't prove it?
I think that's a good analysis. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't even know if this case makes it to trial without Juliana, honestly. Right. That's how weak I think it is. People that if Juliana didn't testify and Brendan did testify and you still didn't believe him, they probably would have convicted him. There were some people at least out there like that. But knowing how you feel about Brendan, obviously, and knowing Juliana was in cahoots with him and did this with him and took the lives of two people with him and is a perpetrator for those two victims as well, what were your thoughts about her plea deal and the fact that the prosecutor said it was not a sweetheart deal?
I'm confused as to why he is taking that angle. I think just say what everybody's thinking and noticing, which is without her testimony, there are a lot of holes that we would not have been able to fill in. As somebody just, picturing myself on a jury, knowing nothing about, the investigative, evidence. I just feel like she really did, a lot of it did hang on her. So I feel like it's better to say, yes, this is a sweetheart deal. It's also, in my opinion, not, that sentence or that, 10, that does not fit the crime that she committed. So it would look better, and the angle would be a lot more satisfying to, I think, the viewers, to be like, we needed her, we needed this testimony. She did us, a solid in at least figuring out what happened here and getting, Brendan what he deserves, so I think he should have just went with us and said, yeah, this was a sweetheart deal. It obviously is.
Yeah. And he could have just said, we could have lost both of them without Juliana, but instead we got both of them with Juliana. We, of course, did not get the sentence we wanted with her. And sometimes you have to do that in order to get full justice in the case, to get both the bad guys or the worst bad guy or whatever. But to act like, obviously they don't think that's a fair deal because that's not something they're going to offer Brendan. And, while Brendan might be the worst of the two bad actors, they both still took two lives together with a plan, and they could not have done it without each other. And so the fact that they're hiding behind or scared to admit that that's a sweetheart deal to me is always going to be something weird. Juliana's sentencing is February 13th. The prosecutors are going to recommend time served. So basically what that means is during the sentencing, the defense asks for something that they think is a fair sentence, and they're going to say she cooperated, she helped them get Brendan. Without her testimony, they wouldn't be able to get Brendan. The prosecutors are going to say, we offered her this deal. We recommend time served, Judge. She did her time 2 years. She did admit her wrongdoing, and she did help us by turning state's evidence. And then the judge has to make a decision. The judge can give her up to 10 years because of the manslaughter plea that she is taking. What do you think the judge will do?
I really hope he gives her the max that she's. I really do. I think it would be a horrible injustice to those victims and that little girl that lost her mom. I think it would be awful if she got anything less than at least the max that she's able to. I really hope he does.
Yeah. The judge is a she. So,
sorry.
I when you said he, I wasn't sure who you meant. Yeah. So they can't give more than the max. So you said at least the max. She's not able to go.
I'm just, yes, obviously that's what I'm hoping for. That to me doesn't even seem like enough, but if it's the max, that's the least that I would say to give her.
Yeah, I think the same thing. And I think it's within her discretion and it's plenty legal for her to give Juliana 10 years. It's definitely something we're going to watch. It doesn't often happen where somebody takes a plea deal and the state recommends time served, because usually the state wants to push for the hardest sentence and penalty against you. They're the ones prosecuting it. They're the ones fighting for the victims, even though the victims are not their client. They're the ones fighting for the people of that state. So it's a little surprising. It would be a little unusual, I think, for the state to recommend 2 years, I think, is time served, and the judge to give 10. But I do think we have extenuating circumstances here. We do have a judge that's not afraid of anything. We have a judge that's going to retire. I think she's the chief justice or regional justice or whatever, one of the boss judges in that county, in that area. So I don't think she'd be afraid to do it if she thought it was necessary. And I think that's most of what the public wants. Trying to think if there are any other questions I have, any other thoughts that you have with the verdict or anything that happened afterwards.
I was thinking about it afterward. Now that he is guilty and I can talk about him as guilty, it's almost worse that his record of events and the way that he was trying to weasel out of responsibility for this heinous crime was to make his wife, the victim, look so horrible, assassinate her.
So, Dad, listen to her response here when she talks about how she wants the judge to take this into account, and then talk about, I give kind of my opinion here when I talk to Whitney, but then I want to get your take on what judges can consider when a defendant does take the stand in sentencing, even though we know he's going away forever here.
Character, the mother of his child, like that, and then to pit himself as some sort of hero in this scenario. I was thinking about it afterward. I was like, what on earth? I mean, that is just the most despicable. I feel like that should weigh in to his punishment in this case, is how he tried to just absolutely it was just disgusting. It was disgusting. It was beyond just committing an awful crime. But then in the aftermath, to try to spin it that he's some hero, he is a piece of work.
Is diabolical is a good word for it. And I think that number one, he also created a story where Joe Ryan is a killer, just an absolute cold-blooded killer. The way that he said he took Christine's life is just personal and horrific, with a knife on top of her, just brutal to think about. Which again, this is somebody that he actually killed, and he, victimized himself. And it is taken into account. Now he's going to get life without parole. That's what's going to happen. I think it's life without parole there. And he's going to get the max sentence. There's no doubt about that. But when a criminal defendant does take the stand and lie, and the judge finds him not credible and the jury finds him not credible, it can be held against him. It can be an enhancement in certain circumstances. And it can be something that the judge mentions at sentencing. So I do think that's something the judge should consider. I do think that's something that should be part of her remarks during his sentencing. And I think it's a good point to bring that up, because it's horrific. It's re-victimizing. It's horrible. It's also creating a scenario and a story in his daughter's head. When she gets older and she watches this, hopefully she never does, but if she does watch this trial and she hears that's what her dad said, whom somebody she probably loves and trusts, every 4-year-old, pretty much, you could tell your 4-year-old the sky is purple and they believe you, your kids just believe you. And so what this could do to her in the future is just brutal and diabolical to think about as well, that he was willing to do that to try to save himself. He didn't care about literally anybody else. So really, really sad set of circumstances.
I agree.
All right. Well, I'm glad you followed the trial. This was fun to get your take on a couple. I know the people liked it. I'm sure they're going to agree with this take too. Sad you couldn't have been with us on the live, but at least we got to get your take on the verdict. So thanks for being here. Have fun.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Talk to you later. Love you.
Bye. Love you.
All right. So what do you think about defendant's credibility on the stand? Judges taking that into account. And let's say it's not a life sentence, but, the judge is taking what happened in the trial, the actions of the defendant, and making the decision.
Right. And I think everybody should understand clearly in this case, there really is no discretion. He's going to get life without parole. But judges do it all the time because if someone lies on the stand, obviously if they get convicted, they lied. when they said they were innocent on the stand. So they can take the entire testimony, look at it, and make it, an aggravator for why they're increasing the sentence. And the judge doesn't even have to say it. He can do it internally in his head as far as the sentence goes, as long as he is within the minimum and maximum sentences that the statute prescribes. So yes, the judge can absolutely take it in. Can I make a general comment, though? I just want to say,
Sure.
especially if there are any lawyers that are listening to this, Whitney did a great job of showing you how jurors think and how jurors look at a case, look at a defendant while he's testifying. There are things that Whitney took into account that we lawyers normally don't take into account. And it's happened multiple times to me, because a lot of times jurors will call you after a trial and talk to you, and you go, gosh, I didn't even think of that. But we sat here and we had the same conclusion Whitney did, guilty verdict. That's the way we felt. But we got there in different ways. We analytically looked at what he said, compared it to the inconsistencies, compared it to the evidence, all that stuff. Jurors don't necessarily do that. Jurors have a feeling when they try. I think I read some of the comments, and I do read the comments, as you know, when they talked about Whitney having the ick factor when he testified, when the defendant testified. That is really, really solid juror analysis. I mean, it really is. That they have to look at this guy and say, he is icky. He is unbelievable. And so things affected her as a juror that wouldn't necessarily affect lawyers that were looking at a case. So she was really great at teaching a lesson to lawyers that you've got to try to look at it like a juror would look at it, and just not coldly like a lawyer would look at it.
And that's what's so great about the chat as a whole, I think, is they do such a good job at that and looking at, and that's why it's the same thing I say in jury selection. Like, I'm not trying to change a juror's mind in jury selection. Just tell me how you feel. Tell me what you actually think. And for lawyers to say, oh, it's all about facts and the law and not feeling, you have to keep feeling out of it. Sure, we tell jurors that, but we all know their feelings are still going to come into this trial. And if you act like you're trying a case that has no feeling and emotion, good luck. You're not going to do a very good job. You play the cards you're dealt, right? And while sympathy and empathy and, all this stuff shouldn't come into a trial, it always does. And you have to deal with it. You have to remind them. You have to show them how the facts need to overcome feelings, and sometimes, but you can't act like the feelings don't exist, because they do, period.
Yeah, one of the things she said too that I thought was interesting, had nothing to do with the trial, but it didn't hit me. I mean, maybe it's because I'm an old guy, but when the prosecutor, I guess, referred to the Julianne as the flavor, that didn't hit me at all. But it sure did. Huh? Did it hit you?
That was gross. Yeah, it just seemed like ugh.
It did. I guess I just kind of flipped over it when I was listening to it. But you see how it affected her? It really did affect her that he said that, and she was really offended. She was also really offended by the way he characterized his wife. We're looking at, again, the inconsistency, those things like that. But we didn't like the way he characterized his wife, but we didn't realize how significant that would be to a juror, that he characterized his wife that way. And it was very significant. So I appreciate what Whitney did, because I think it taught a lot of good lessons.
Yeah. And I do think that as we go through these cases, it's interesting to understand that regardless of how lawyers think about things and what lawyers say are good lawyers, like same thing we talk about Carol, like he had some decent parts and moments, but like fell completely flat, and the people just didn't believe him, didn't think he was engaging. He didn't convince anybody. And at the end of the day, that's how you lose a jury trial. Now, sometimes there are unwinnable cases, but.
Well, and I've told you this a lot of times about how this program makes you so good at jury selection. And I've told you that because of you really, really have a better idea of how non-lawyers think about a case and look about a case, and you are able to select a jury based on that. And it really gives you a tremendous advantage.
Yeah, I mean, being able to talk to thousands of people that are very similar to the 40 people in the room where we're picking our juries is a huge advantage. And I tell the chat that all the time. That's why I love learning just how they think and how they go through things. And at the end of the day, I think the 12 jurors that actually were taken back to deliberate were 7 women and 5 men. I think that was the breakdown. So there were plenty of women back there. Does an M conviction recognized by her home country of Brazil, would that follow her home? So I want to ask you this because I know we actually have had clients that have gone back to Brazil after we represented them for certain criminal allegations.
But we won, though.
Well, again, technically, well, we lost and we won, and we did everything in that case.
But they eventually dropped the charges, so they have a
What would
clean
it have
record.
been like? Did you look into that at all? How it would have affected him in Brazil?
It would not have had a great effect on him in Brazil. It would have had an effect on him on travel, because he could never have come. He can't, never have come back. Not that he's going to come back anyway, but he's never could come back to the United States. But he also could affect his travel to other countries, because other countries take into account criminal convictions when they're giving visas and allowing people to come into their countries. So it could have an effect on him in travel for sure. But I don't know what's in this country or not.
And she'll have a manslaughter conviction, not a murder. But
Right.
so yeah, it could definitely still affect her. Jen said Ufferman crushed on the appeal. I'll have to go check out that oral argument. Sweet Lorraine said, can you do a show on what's happening with Don Lemon? I don't understand why he's arrested. So I saw that he went on Jimmy Kimmel. I don't know any of the facts about the situation. My immediate thought without knowing anything is this feels like part of the slippery slope that everybody just seems to be engaging in politics these days, but I don't know what the actual charges or facts are. So we'll save that for another video. Chris K said, here late. Thanks, Mr. Tragos, Whitney, and Peter. Make sure Peter gets both of you blizzards. I haven't gotten that yet, by the way. He said he sent I'm assuming he's sending a Dairy Queen gift card. So we're going to get some blizzards because they're my favorite. So we'll have to do that. Pantuffle, but giving her 10 years in spite of the deal undermines future deals with her accused. No. Okay. So here's the question, Dad. I believe what this person is asking is, does a judge going up to the max after the prosecution recommends time served, does that affect the future ability of prosecutors to make deals with different co-defendants or people in other cases?
Not necessarily, because there was no guarantee of no jail time. This was only a recommendation. And I guarantee you, I haven't seen the plea agreement, but I've heard about it. In there, it clearly states the judge is not bound by it. The judge can give all the way up to 10 years. And when she signed it, she understood that. So I don't think so, because, again, this is not your everyday case. This is an exceptional situation. So I'm not really sure it's going to have really any kind of impact, because you always explain to your client whenever you do a plea deal like this. You really go over it with them, because, again, you're talking about ineffective assistance of counsel. If you tell them they're going to get time served and they get 10 years, then that certainly could be ineffective assistance of counsel.
Yeah. So I mean, I have like two ways I could answer this emphatically. And one way I would say absolutely not. This doesn't affect anything emphatically, because we always tell our clients, we don't know. It's no guarantee. It's up to the judge. This is just what they're going to recommend. And just because one time we had a judge go up doesn't mean we're not going to make a deal for another client, or we're going to recommend it against it for another client. We'll weigh the pros and the cons, explain them to the client. It's the client's decision at the end of the day. We'll tell them what we think the chances are of winning or losing in the case. So it doesn't really affect any of that. But on the other hand, I can argue it has a huge effect, because we know our judges. So if we have a case in front of a judge and a prosecutor offers us a deal, we have had conversations like this where we'll tell the prosecutor, we can't take that deal. Judge so-and-so loves to go up. They don't take your recommendation. They're going to hammer my client. They're going to give my client the max. So what can we do as lawyers? We can say it can't be manslaughter. It's got to be a misdemeanor with a 1-year max, or we'll plead to 2 misdemeanors that have 2 1-year maxes. So the judge can't go above the 2 years that you're agreeing with right now. So of course a judge can reject the plea deal in altogether to the crimes. That's less likely to happen than for them to go above what the prosecutor asks for in a situation like this. So sometimes we will use who the judge is in negotiating the plea for what actual crimes our client's going to plead to, because we don't want to put them in a situation with a judge that we know always goes up from what the state recommends.
Oh yeah. And again, it's important to know your judges. Many times we've done pleas in cases where we know this judge and we know the judge is not going to go above, or in fact, when we ask for no recommendation, the reason we don't want any recommendation is because we know this judge may go below what we think the sentence is going to be. So absolutely knowing the judge is critical.
Yeah. He gives Beauty for Ashes, said, a smart lawyer will really take advantage of social media, learning in real time what's going on in their case and what is not, plus getting advice from other lawyers they may not have thought of. So what I'll say about this is a perfect kind of segue and plug. Oh, we haven't talked about those two other, I got to be out 1:00 hard. So we're going to hit those two interviews next. But tomorrow morning, my interview with Nico LaHood and Jason Goss from the Uvalde case is going to post. And we talk a lot about this. So this is a great point, and we'll talk more about that. Favorite Blizzard ingredient? Mine's a Reese Cup Blizzard. What's yours?
Mine would be the hard chocolate that they put in there. And you put chocolate in, it turns hard.
Okay, hard shell. All right. All right, so tell me about the let's start with the police chief interview. It was the shorter one that you watched. What were your takeaways? Because I didn't watch it.
Interestingly, what he said was and because it's such a serious crime, police chiefs, a good police chief, will get involved when they hear that something like this, a crime like this occurred. And he actually got involved from the very beginning. And he said they had red flags, and the first red flag they had that something was amiss here was the 911 calls, 13 minutes apart. Says that never happens, and that was their first red flag. And he basically, it was a very short interview. He obviously thought that the police did a great job. They followed up leads. And he also said that Juliana was manipulated into cooperating and doing this. That's really, like I said, it was a very short interview. Again, complimentary of his officers and the red flags that they saw.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think of like what tipped him off, because I heard it was the pictures in the bedroom when they went back that they had like moved in together when I think it was Juliana lied about their relationship. But that's another interesting point. The 911 calls to me were some of the best evidence. Like I kept coming back to what corroborates this. Well, he didn't even try to really explain that, right? Like, why did she call 911 13 minutes apart? Like, because he's not saying she set this up. People didn't really know what Brendan Banfield was trying to say when it came to Juliana and Joe Ryan. Like, who was the criminal and why? Like, why did they snap? Why did he go get personal lubricant? So those definitely created holes in the story of Brendan Banfield.
Right. And I think, again, we looked at it, those 911 calls being significant because, again, going back to this, I just didn't think they did a good job of presenting the blood if they thought the blood was the number one, nail in the coffin here. So, again, the 911 calls is what's mentioned by the chief, and I thought that was significant.
Yeah, I agree. All right, what about Joe Ryan's mom's interview?
A wonderful interview. It really, really, I hate to say because, again, she's a grieving mother, but it was so entertaining. She really was good. She spoke well. She answered the questions. She gave some shocking disclosures, frankly. She described her son, loving son, caring son, all the things you would expect a mother to say. But he also was, do you know what LARPing is?
No.
LARPing is apparently when people dress up in costumes and go out in the woods and have sword fights with fake swords and have role playing.
Yeah, live action role play. It reminds me of that movie, Role Models. There was a movie called Role Models where they did this in it. So yeah, okay.
Yeah. So apparently he was really into that.
Okay.
And he was really into BDSM. We
figured that out.
Yes, but I mean the fact that he would talk to his mother about it, and he would tell his mother about it, and he would tell his mother about his experiences with that, and they discussed it. They discussed the fact that he would do this dressed up in Batman costumes and things like that. All, again, interesting interview. I mean, the fact that mom knew all this, but she also said that people that participate in this kind of activity are smart and they have boundaries. And if you remember during the testimony, they had trouble finding someone who would just come straight out to the house.
Yeah.
Most of these people wanted to meet in a public place first or have dinner, something so that they could feel whether or not they were safe or not. So that's consistent with the testimony that these people are smart and they try to be safe.
But he didn't.
Yeah, but he didn't. I know.
Right. That was the sad part.
A really important, I thought, key in this goes against everything the prosecutors have been saying. The prosecutors called her up about the plea deal. and talked to her about the plea deal, and which is, again, common and good practice for prosecutors to call the family of the victim up and talk to them about the plea deal before it becomes public, before it comes out, because you really don't want them blasting you in the press after the plea deal comes out. So they called her up, and they said they wanted to make the plea deal. It was necessary to ensure Brendan would be found guilty. Now, again, different attitude than they're showing in press conferences.
I agree with that, though.
Yes, but that's what they told her, and that's a quote, that they wanted to necessary to ensure Brendan would be found guilty. So that's what the prosecutor should be saying. I don't know why they're dancing around it. She said she agreed to it, but she doesn't like it, and she said that Juliana got a deal that she didn't deserve, but she agreed to it because of what the prosecutor said. So that, again, that kind of summarizes the interview with the mom. But I thought it was a very good interview, and I think it lasted about 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think it's great to kind of give him more of a face and a name. He wasn't a highlight of the trial. I wouldn't say they hid behind him, but I think it was easier for the prosecutors to focus on Christine than it was Joe. In what?
Well, I'd just say she complimented law enforcement. She said,
yeah,
because they always referred to two victims. She was not physically able to go to the trial. She had some physical problems, so she watched it. But she said law enforcement were so good about talking to her about the case, and always referring to two victims, not forgetting about him.
Right. Golden Gear said, I don't get to be here for lives much. I think she deserves the max, but I think she will get some time off, not time served. So something in the middle, which again, judges like to split the baby. Rolling Along still said, Peter, you guys ought to talk to Whitney more for your own trials. She gives a non-lawyer view, and a majority of jurors are not lawyers. We do this in every case, basically. I mean, my dad, I remember always used to talk to my mom about it. I talked to her about every case, especially jury selection, some of the issues with the case. What would you think about it? Even the one that I just tried, we always do this. So yeah, good point. KLB said, I rarely send super chats, but I absolutely love to hear Papa T's perspective, and I adore Whitney. I guess Peter is okay. Yeah, I'll just stick around. I'll stick around, make sure we can keep the conversation going. Kim, did they ever establish whether or not our fantasy took place? Because if so, that makes Christine's final moments even more horrific. I don't know specifically. I mean, do you mean that like Joe pretended to get on top of her with a knife, and even if she was screaming, he kept going because that's kind of what they said she wanted? I don't know if we ever got like solidified in that, but I think whatever version of what happened would have been horrific final moments for Christine, in my opinion. KLB said, I meant Papa G. I just took my medicine. Either one works. Did Brendan calling Joe Ryan Joe seem weird to you? For me, it seemed to give away Brendan had personal familiarity with him. Maybe I am just projecting. It didn't affect me at all. What about you?
No, I didn't even notice it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times in cases when you hear a name over and over and over again, the defendant who's been sitting in the room for 2 weeks listening to it too sometimes picks up on that. But again, that might be a lawyer who does this for a living's thought versus a juror. Maybe some jurors did think that way. Pantuffle, my gratitude to the three of you. That's all. 5 really with John and Kelsey. Well, thank you for that. And I think that's a good one to go out on, Dad. Thanks for joining us for another trial. We got all the way to the verdict. Maybe we'll talk about some of the appeals going on. We got a Murdoch appeal. We got a Charlie Adelson appeal going on. But that's it for this trial for now. We'll probably cover the sentencing in a couple weeks for Juliana, and then eventually Brendan's, maybe if people want to. I think that one's going to be a little more anticlimactic. But what happens to Juliana is going to be really interesting to me. But I appreciate you coming on, discussing the verdict and the interviews. Till next time, we are out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast featuring new episodes every week. And if you have a case that you want to personally talk to us about in your life, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, truck accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.